I have two front broken coil springs. You can see where this piece is, well, non-existent anymore. And then the right front, the top of it broke off. So here is, well, the top of it. And the bottom half of the strut mount. Which means, if I can get it to focus, that the spring is sitting on the car, which it is. You can see it right there, how it's digging into the actual frame of the car, or the shock tower, excuse me. So yeah, that means that now this spring is now like a live weapon when I unbolt it. So I'm gonna have to be extra careful with that. Luckily, some of the tension is gone now, thanks to, you know, this, well, being broke, but I still can't move it free. Wait. Oh, well, you know what? There's not much tension on that. I'll be able to safely remove that without any special tools. This is after the job is done. This is all the tools I used for the entire project. I used a couple of wrenches, metric of course, since this is an import car. All metric sockets. I did attempt to use a couple of the Allen keys here for the sway bar links, but ended up not using those and using vice grips instead. Then of course some ratchets, screwdriver. I use this for prying rather than actually, you know, for screws. I use this for digging out some gunk, trying to get the Allen key to sit flush. Hammer for whacking out the suspension bolts. I recommend using some kind of power tool for this. You don't need it, but man, these bolts are tight and it makes the job go way faster. Once again, you don't need it, just use it for running the bolts down so to save my wrist from carpal tunnel. And then a couple torque wrenches to make sure the job is done absolutely correctly, except for the sway bar links. I hate those things, run them down. I did use some heat on the sway bar links because they were good and tight, so your mileage may vary, you may not need that. And then of course some of this, which I'm not sure I let soak long enough to be effective. Then of course a flashlight if you're working inside. And these because I would like to be able to be old and still hear things. So with that, as you can see, it's all basic hand tool stuff. You can do this at home in your driveway. So I got a couple of Monroe units from the Cloverleaf store. I am going the route of doing the entire assembly, so strut, spring, and mount, for the sake of just being easier. Now let's open this thing up and compare it to what we have before we take anything else apart. So first glance at this particular car, sometimes you'll have the same part number and interchangeable side to side. This particular car is not like that. One obvious way you can tell, the sway bar bracket right here is on opposite sides of the strut, so these do matter which side they go on. So this one here is the driver's side and that's the passenger side. And then it should come with new hardware and all of that jazz, which they do. And my new hardware comes with 3 bolts. These are the ones for up top. So the passenger side here, I'm gonna kind of do my best to yep, it's the same. Good deal. Sway bar lengths on the left. I got my bracket here for my brake hose and ABS wire here. So these look to be correct. So I'm going to start with this upper sway mount. There's a lot of rust in this thing. This is an Allen socket. Should be able to get an Allen in this. I got a lot of the dirt dug out. I'm going to kind of give it some taps. There we go. There, it's kind of going in there now. It's going to be stuck. So I'm going to hit this with an impact first. Now it's not going to come all the way out, but it is going to break it loose, just to save my wrists. There. Now the joint is just spinning inside of itself. That's not what I want. I don't want to wear it out. But sometimes some of these will have a flat spot in the back that you can put a wrench on it. You can also put a vice grip back here, really good and tight. I want to try not to do that because I don't want to tear up this boot, shortening the lifespan of the sway bar link. What you want to do is get a wrench, and then we're going to get our Allen socket here and make sure it's fully seated. Because Allens strip out really easily, and it's the last thing you want happening right now. If it does, I'm going to resort to the vice grips, and if it goes bad, it goes bad. So now this is going to throw you off, because yes, we're taking it off. We want the ratchet set to on, since we're basically turning the stud instead of the nut. I know it sounds goofy, but trust me. And this way we can actually see it turning. And this is a really good example too of why you want to go a little bit and then back it tightened again. Because you can see as it's tightening, it's actually scraping off all of that gunk that was on the threads. And if you keep going, it'll just ram that into the nut and you'll get it stuck and then you'll break it. Look at all that gunk right there, all the threads being cleaned off. Might be able to let the wrench just sit there. I'm actually going to stop here because I can see my Allen socket bending. And I don't really feel like sitting here all day and breaking my wrists. So I'm just going to get it off and hoping the vice grips don't ruin my boot back here. Simply come in behind and you're going to put the jaw flat up against the bracket for the sway bar link. And in my case, the jaw is rounded and curved. So I want to try to get it in the center of that curve for the max amount of surface area and grip so it doesn't slip. And you are going to want this really good and tight. But now I'm just going to tap this and not just hold it on. So I'm resorting to fire. Now you do want to be careful with this because you don't want to heat up the actual strut part, because if you get it too hot, there's pressurized gas in there and it can explode. And I have removed the direct light so I can see if something's glowing or not. And I want to move it around and not just focus the heat on one spot. I go to both sides of the nut here. I want to get it really close so most of the heat is concentrated on the nut and not anywhere else. You can see the bracket there starting to glow. Now this little tiny torch is not going to get the nut glowing red hot like you would ideally want. But it hopefully will do the trick. And notice how I still have my vice grips on there because they're going to get hot doing this, and I don't want to try to put them on and fight everything at the same time. I want it to be as hot as possible when I go to take the nut off, so leaving the vice grips there saves time. Or sorry, tighten up the vice grips. Get a new bite. Next, I'm going to take off this bracket that holds the brake hose and the ABS sensor wire here, because you don't want to take off these big bolts yet, because when this control arm drops down, you don't want there to be stress on this hose and break it in half or anything. Hopefully it comes right loose, because you really don't want to break it. If you're concerned about it, this bolt you can feel the back of it, which I can feel it turning, so that's good. It's getting tight again, so I'm going to tighten it back up, get the dirt out of the threads, and then go back off again. So now we should have enough play in this brake hose and this wire now that we shouldn't have to take off the caliper or the ABS sensor or anything, so it should be able to drop down and this should be okay. So now we're going to get this little plastic bracket off of here, just to get it out of the way. Now for these two big bolts down here at the bottom, you have an impact. You can make short work of this. This particular one's a 22 on both sides. It doesn't matter too much on most cars, but do pay attention to the orientation of the bolts. See how the bolt head is here on the left towards the front of the car, and the nut is towards the back of the car. I'm going to reassemble it like that. It wouldn't matter if you did, but I like to keep it how it was. You can see this bottom bolt here doesn't have any weight on it, where this top one, however, does. At this point, you should be able to see it pivot now. Nope, it just kind of wedged in there. So at this point, too, you don't have to be scared of this thing shooting down or anything. The control arm is trying to fall, however, but it's not going to spring down and scare you or anything like that. This spring pressure is contained right now because the strut is holding it, so we don't have to worry about that. A couple different ways to get these bolts out It's not best practice, don't get me wrong, but these bolts are a hardened steel and you can definitely get away with hitting them with a hammer without damaging threads, believe it or not. The next way is actually spinning it with an impact, and you can actually use your wrench right here, put it up against, and then you can put pressure on it without hurting your fingers. Now that this is free, I should be able to separate the strut from the steering knuckle. This one doesn't really want to. I'm gonna use my screwdriver pry bar deal here. There we go. So now you can see this whole thing is free. My tie rod, my axle, and lower ball joint are all still attached. I'm not gonna lean it this way because that gives me all the room. So up top you will find 4 nuts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice 3 of them are the same size, at least they're supposed to be. The center one, however, is much bigger. If you take this center nut out, all that spring tension is going to be released. It's going to shoot that thing down. Bad things happen. People have gotten seriously hurt doing that. But if you just take out these outer 3, you're fine because this strut is self-contained. So just to make that a little bit more clear, we'll move our safety sticker here. So you can see those 3 studs and then the center nut right here. That center one is this right here. So you can see this spring is contained by the bottom of the strut here and then this mount up here. So these shouldn't be real tight. So I'm going to loosen them all first. You can see the strut starting to drop out. Now I'm going to grab it from underneath at the base. Dodge all your obstacles down here. And here our strut is removed. Have my new 3 nuts right here at the ready. Gonna make sure that they're the same size as the old ones. They are not, so I better grab a different socket. Now I have the right socket. Get this thing all ready to go. And this part's usually a little harder. So I just gotta kind of guide it up in there. And then hold it with one hand, of course. Once you get one started, you can let it hang there and use that as your pivot point. So I can push it up, and now I'm not actually holding it. I'm not holding it up, I'm just holding it over. Now I'll mention it again too, but notice how this strut can move forward and backwards. It's not a whole lot in this car, but after changing struts like this, the car will have to be aligned. I won't show it for the sake of time in the video, but when I'm done, I will take this car over to a shop to be aligned. These upper bolts are 63 foot-pounds. I'm gonna work them up. Do multiple stages to make sure I don't get anything cockeyed or crooked. They're all about 35, 40-ish. I'm going to do the last pass. And now we're done up here. All right, so now if you need to, you're perfectly safe to twist this thing if it will let you. There we go. So you twist back and forth. I'm going to make sure our wire here is on the right side and not pinched in between or anything. I'm going to go ahead and push the strut back, get it all in place. Then we'll start one bolt, because once we get one started, we can use it as a pivot point and make assembly easier. Okay, so now we should be able to push this thing back into place. Oh, I think my axle has come out of its socket. There we go. If you have that too, sometimes the CV axle can come out of its socket. If you have that, just give it a few good whacks, it'll go back into place. So no big deal there. But now you can see that this will pivot. There we go. So same thing going in. They're hardened bolt, give them a whack. Hitting solid there, okay. Get the weight off of it. There we go. And to prove my point, nut still starts by hand, even though we're beating on it against our better judgment. So I'm going to run these down with the impact, but not fully tighten it yet. And you'll see that space in between here, you'll see this clamp squished together. So the torque spec for these nuts and bolts are 155 foot-pounds. I want to make sure I turn the nut side and not the bolt side. There's a lot of friction on the bolt side here because it's going through this. There's downward force on it. In this case, it's just spinning. But the point is, it will take a lot more force to turn that nut through the whole thing. So you're going to get an inaccurate torque if you do that. Whereas here on the other side, you only have that one friction point underneath the head of the nut. Now, of course, the alignment shop's going to have to undo this anyway, because this point, as you saw, can pivot back and forth, and that will affect camber, and that will affect tire wear. So you ideally don't want to drive it that far until you get aligned. A few miles, no big deal, but you don't want to drive it a long time that way. So I'm going to put my little plastic clip back on here. See the little holes that this clip slides into. And put our hose back in place here. And of course get that tab and that little circle there first. This little tab right here has kind of an L shape to it, so you'll have to sneak it in there. You can't just set it. So you got to twist it, put it in, and then get it all straight. And this bolt right here just needs to be snug, just like that. So back to my sway bar. Now that it's cooled down a little, you can see how much the vice grips have just destroyed the boot on this thing. Yes, it didn't help that I heated it up, but it's actually torn open. Because I'm an absolute cheapskate, I'm going to leave it there until it actually makes noise. So we're going to go ahead and put this thing back in. Well, is it loose yet? Nope. Okay. Sometimes you can get lucky by putting pressure on it like this and tapping the trigger to get them to go back on easily. Let's find out. This side I'm going to do a little bit differently. I'm going to take the top off first because that spring, like I saw earlier, is sitting on the shock tower. Now I don't like to do it this way because now when it falls down, it's going to put all the extra weight and strain on the control arm bushings down there, which is not what I'm after, but I also don't really want to choose violence today. So I'm going to stand out of the way. It shouldn't go anywhere because this should catch it, but we're just going to play it safe. Nothing went bang, so that's good. Okay, let's see. Am I gonna die? Nope. Okay, well, it ain't coming all the way off, but it should. Just a little bit of damage here from the spring digging in. but not too bad. Nothing to worry about. Oh, pulled my axle out again. So even though I only took off the fronts, I'm checking all four wheels, because you never know when you might find a loose lug nut and it might save you or someone else's life. So anywhere between 50 and 150 miles, I'm going to check the torque again, because the metal, especially the aluminum like this, will actually compress a little bit, and then a lug nut will become loose or less torque than it was before. So it's important to check them afterwards. That second time, you're usually good to go until you take the wheel off again. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe.